Good evening. Please be sure your microphones are muted, and we are going to begin our program. I'm Linda Hansen. Oh, I should put my picture up there. I'm Linda Hansen, and I'm the co-president of the League of Women Voters of Indiana. I want to welcome all of you to the first in our virtual documentary film series. This series is part of a larger effort in this legislative session to focus on Indiana's redistricting process and to push for greater transparency. Collaborative efforts by the League, Common Cause, and 22 other nonpartisan organizations in our All In for Democracy coalition have not budged the state legislature on redistricting reform since the Legislative Study Committee's recommendation was submitted in October 2016. So we are expanding our efforts to influence the legislature. With this series of documentaries, we hope to engage you in the issues impacted by redistricting. We also want to entice you to participate in the virtual public forums that the Indiana Citizens Redistricting Commission will be holding in February and early March. Then to engage in map drawing when the census data becomes available, and to advocate with your legislators for fair maps. Commission members were announced this afternoon, and I will tell you more about the commission at the end of our program. Right now, though, I'd like to give you a few guidelines for this evening for our procedures. Please leave your access on mute so that we don't have interfering sounds. And if you have questions as the film progresses, or certainly when we get to the Q&A after the film, put those questions into chat and we will bring them to the panelists from the chat. And at this point, I would like to ask that our tech team start the recording. So I've seen this before and I'm still moved by it, so I'm trying to stop the tears. I know I saw questions and comments that we're going to get to. We have two panelists who are going to be able to respond to your questions. So let me introduce them to you right now and give them a few minutes to tell us a little bit about how they see these issues based on their experience and observations in Indiana. Olisa Humes is a family advocate for Head Start in Columbus, Indiana, and she's the president of the Columbus chapter of the NAACP. Our other panelist this evening is a newcomer standing in for someone that we had originally scheduled because she's ill. So Hal Turner is joining us. He's a 13-year resident of Bloomington and as a three-time retiree from IBM supercomputer development, IBM mainframe development. He served as chair of the Monroe County Board of Elections and currently serves as a member. He is a 4-year board member and treasurer of Stonebelt ARC. So he's been on a panel for Suppressed before. He may have some idea of the kinds of things that you want to ask, but I'm going to ask him to speak first for a few minutes, and then I'm going to ask Olisa to speak about her experience with Indiana, and then open it to questions. So if you have questions, please type them into the chat. I'm going to try to answer them. Some of them I'm answering in chat. Others will be presented to our panelists. Okay, so Hal. Can you unmute so we can hear you?
Okay, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I was trying to do the keyboard unmute and it wasn't unmuting for me. I had the fortune to be invited to an earlier League of Women Voters meeting where we addressed these subjects before the election. And I'm thankful we did. As a team, as an election team, the election board reviewed all of these items and actually had reviewed many of them earlier for the primary to make sure that we were not going to be another Georgia. And I think the results came out pretty well. We actually got fan mail after the election. People were happy about the way we handled the coronavirus, how we handled mail-ins and absentee ballots, how we handled provisional ballots. We were careful to err on the side of the voter. And I don't know what other counties did, but Monroe County has a long tradition of bipartisan work on the Board of Elections, and that continued through this election.
That's good experience. I hope that was the experience of every election board. Now, I would like, before I open it up to the questions, I would like Olisa to be able to say a few words. Olisa?
Hi, my name is Olisa. I am the former president, current vice president of the local branch of the NAACP and the political action chair. So I am looking forward to a couple of things. My experience, I ran for a political office in November, and I didn't win, but it was an enlightening experience to the process, and I think that more people need to take part of. We don't really fully understand the whole process, so I think that there's always some shenanigans in Bartholomew County. So we're trying to still work through those, I believe. So some questions in regards to residency and stuff like that. So we're working through those. But I'm super excited to be a part of the group.
Thank you, Olisa. I want to say, again, I've answered this a couple times, but we will post the link to the film and so that you can see it again if you want to share it. There's also, I will also give you a link to write to the director because he would be willing to give you more information, discussion materials and so forth if you like. There is probably a couple day period when this whole recording will be available. After that, we are going to cut the documentary out of it and we will post the recording of the Q&A session so that people can go back to that. They can see the video on their own and then they can come back to the discussion. But one of the first questions, what does the panel think are the chances of the bill before Congress, HR 1, to eliminate gerrymandering, etc.? It's being publicized as a way to have more secure voting and a few other things. How?
Okay. Yeah, I was first made aware of that when I was asked by the local league if I was interested in being a candidate to be part of the process for redistricting. Unfortunately, because my position on the election board, I wasn't able to do that. It would have been a conflict of interest. But I think it's vital that we get people involved in that process. It has traditionally, for both parties, been a place where the winner rules and the loser loses big time. You can see that in the 2010 and the year 2000 results of redistricting. If you compare those two maps, it's almost like we're different states. So I don't think that serves the voters well. I think it probably could provide a great difficulty for people in voting in some of those circumstances, because confusion is a big factor in losing voters. So I really think that the bill needs serious discussion and consideration. And I think a big input to that would be if citizens got together and came up with what they think is a decent redistricting and presented that to the legislators. But we're running out of time. Yes.
Well, and we hope that's part of what we are doing this spring. So I will get to some more of that at the end of the program.
Yeah.
But I know a couple of quick questions. Why does a polling place cost $4,000?
I don't know what drove their cost. I know our budget is determined a year ahead of time, and we kind of have to live with that. But within that budget, we were able to enlarge our early voting area to double capacity. Unfortunately, social distancing negated a lot of that, and we were able to get all brand new equipment for voting. Electronic voting equipment that is extremely safe. It's never attached to the internet, so it's not subject to external hacking. And we were able to ensure that people in Monroe County, when they cast their vote, they could be confident that vote was counted.
That raises a good question, because one of the other questions is, why does so much of the election process fall on the county? Technology and process varies between counties and training seems lacking. And I may ask Olisa to talk about what happens in Columbus as well. So you've got some balance here.
This is why it happens. Because of this book, it defines that elections are held at the county basis and managed at the county basis. This is a sizable tome. And a ponderous one at that. If you've ever tried to read this, it reads like a telephone book, except a little more difficult to understand. So we have to change fundamentally the way we do elections in Indiana if we want to change that.
Yeah, Olisa, do you have something to add to that?
Can you repeat the question? Because I think I have a response, but I want to make sure that I'm speaking to the question.
Well, asking about the fact that the election procedures, to some extent, are all left to the counties, the differences in the equipment and everything else. And
well, I think that leads to the disparity. I think that when you leave it to specific counties, it falls in the hands of whoever is in power of that county, and that's dangerous. I think that because people, like I said before, have fallen away from the process and are not holding people accountable for their actions, or so they don't get involved until the election. Well, at that point, it's kind of too late. Like you need to be involved before the election, so you can say, well, for instance, in our county, there was some question in regards to the residency of one of the candidates. Well, by the time it was brought up, he was already on the ballot. So it like at that point, there's really nothing that you can do. So I think that you have to, for this whole process to work, it's going to require people to use their civic duty.
yes, so that's going to call on all of us.
Absolutely.
So one quick thing, somebody asked about the census data. Yes, it will. The latest date is that it should arrive on the 30th of April, and our legislature is supposed to be disbanded by the 28th, I believe. So that sounds like a special session, which gives us a little more time to put pressure on them. And Mary Noon asks a question about the current state legislature having a supermajority and a trifecta with the governorship, and about the league strategy. So I'm going to come back to that at the end when I talk a little bit more about the Indiana Citizens Redistricting Commission, because we're going to call on all of you to help us get information out. The okay, another thing, which of the techniques that were shown in the film have been used in Indiana?
Okay, I
The
can take
purging?
this.
You both get a turn. Hal, go ahead.
Okay. I believe the voter IDs laws in Indiana are there to ensure that the voter who casts a vote is the voter who's entitled to cast it. If it presents a burden for people, there are other IDs that are accepted in Indiana, up to and including state university IDs. Registrations can be done by mail, so or online, so that's not a real pinch point for people to be able to vote. Purchase the rolls are done very judiciously by the state and by the clerks. I can't really speak about that too much because we haven't had a purge since I've been involved. As far as the number of precincts we have, that is agreed to between the parties and the clerk of courts, and they can only be changed by unanimous vote and agreement. We will be.
That's by county then, right?
It's done by county. Precincts will be determined based on the census data this year. We did combine some precincts. Originally in Monroe County, we had more than 80, and we brought that down to 34 to make it manageable. And because of COVID, we consolidated to 7 large sites distributed around the county where people could vote in the primary, but in the general election, we had 28 locations. Several places we traditionally voted refused to let us in because of COVID. There were schools and other areas where if we wanted to, we could throw our muscle around and say we're going anyway. But we tried to be good citizens and not leave any people feeling that we were throwing legal weight to vote there. So the issue of lines too long, our place in controlling the lines was kind of tenuous this year because of the special COVID situation. But during early voting, we were processing someone in one location every 45 seconds. So that was a remarkable number. Our voting locations were distributed throughout the county and had unanimous agreement by everybody on the board, and registration errors were handled through provisional voting. Again, we require a unanimous vote in Monroe County for anyone who cast a ballot to have that ballot not counted. We err on the side of the voter, whether it's a signature consideration or wrong address, or voting in the wrong precinct. We made sure that it was unanimous and only unanimous to deny someone the right to vote. I can't hear you.
Sorry, my phone
Okay.
has started ringing, so I muted.
Yeah.
I suspect there are going to be differences in counties because I know I'm looking at some of the chats and there are some counties like Henry County that had 41 precincts, but moved to 12 voting centers in 2018, saving $25,000 per election cycle. So the impact of voting centers on voters is also another issue.
Yeah.
Olisa, oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, we don't have vote centers in Monroe County. We're going to look at it this year. We're going to look at the effect it might have on voters, and we'll make that decision with, again, unanimous agreement.
So Olisa, what has your experience been? And I know you were in in Indianapolis for a while too. So what was your experience with the lines
So,
access?
so in Bartholomew County, access was not a problem at all. Compare it to Monroe, not Monroe, sorry, Marion County, where my friends had to stand in line for hour upon hour to get to the polls. So, I mean, I'm very grateful because we had a voting center. We have a shopping center that it used to be a mall. It's now owned by the city and it's empty. So they used it as a voting center, and then, like they had churches around the city. They had like the local park. So there was plenty areas to go vote everywhere, except for I think the only problem that I could note in regards to Bartholomew County is that the what's called East Columbus. I don't know that there was a polling place there. So for people who were poor or without transportation, it may have been difficult for them to get to a polling place. So that compared to my experience in Marion County was way different. Like I had to stand in line, and it's been every election. It's just not on the key ones. It's just, every election you just knew you had to stand in line.
So I know this year with COVID issues, the league and our coalition members were trying to petition the state board of elections to make access to paper ballots, absentee ballots, available to all, and to extend the voting hours. Ultimately, after they postponed the primary, they said that any changes in election laws were really up to the legislature. So they were unwilling to accommodate safe, secure access to ballot for everyone. And as it was, we still had a dramatic increase in the number of absentee ballots. One of the suggestions that showed up in the chat was that yes, if we had paper ballots for everyone, which would be a way to ensure we had the access to audits without any issues. That's one of the issues that we might want to go for. Another does have to do with the strategy being used to purge and legislation that passed and that the League and NAACP and Common Cause challenged had to do with using a software program that would imprecisely identify people in different states called crosscheck, and it allowed the state to purge voters without notifying them. So that, we challenged that. They redid it and put in a new program, but they still left out notifying voters. So Monroe County may not have had any of the people involved in that, but I know someone did indicate in the chat that she was purged, and only after she questioned that and, had them look at her record, she voted every time for 16 years, did they put her back into the rolls. So we need to make sure that we observe the processes that are being followed. Yes, go to your board of election meetings, look in advance, as Monroe County did, for any possible problems and try to solve them before they get out there. Indiana, with its voter ID law, is considered one of the most repressive states, just because of the way the voter ID law works. And it's, for many, it's not an issue, but for some it is. And that's one of the things that we need to be looking at. We do have someone who's just talking about in the chat, a repositioned Hoosier who lives in Colorado, where we have vote by mail. It's awesome. We register at the DMV and the ballot arrives by mail 3 weeks before each election. Once completed, I walk mine to one of the 83 secured drop boxes in Denver County alone. And I've seen some of those boxes in Colorado. It's an awesome idea. So vote by mail. Or automatic voter registration at the DMV. There are a lot of ways that we could go to ensure that registration is accurate and that everyone has the same ID information in place on all the records. There are a lot of things that we need to look out for, and that may mean it does mean we need as many Hoosiers as possible to know about these issues and to be on our alert list to notify our legislators of what we want, to let them know that we have a lot of people behind us, that we do have a way that we can move on these issues. So let me see. Is there, let me see. Is there someone who would like to talk about their experience in this last election, who would like to bring it to our panelists' attention? If so, raise your hand if you can see where that is on it. Nope, that's not there. Put your name into chat, say you want to talk, and I will call on you and you can unmute.
And while we're waiting, if I could just make a comment about mailing ballots to everyone. The one issue that raises is called custody of the ballot. And custody of the ballot is something we guarantee right now. Whether it would be difficult to maintain that. There's a lot of background noise going on here.
Yeah. If you're not muted, if you're, yeah, please mute unless you're talking.
Yeah, if we mail a ballot to someone, we only know that ballot gets to the post office. We don't know that it gets to the right person fills it out, and the right person mails it back. We don't know if somebody mailed back 100 that they collected. We don't know what happens to it on the other end until we get it back. Combined with signature verification, we would probably be okay in that situation, but it would be much, much more difficult and time consuming. And we could not guarantee results the day of the election with that kind of a voting system.
One of the things about making that work has to do with our law that says votes cannot be counted until the day of the election. So 6 a.m. on the election day, you can begin to count ballots. That's why the number of absentee ballots delayed final results this year.
And that's because of the Indiana's dead voter law. They require us to remove any ballot that had been cast by a person who died between when they cast the ballot and election day. And we can only do that if we hold all the ballots until election day before we start counting the absentees. However, Monroe County was able to count a record number of ballots on election day and finish election day. We did not carry it over into the night. We saw it coming and we prepared.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, I want to call on Mary Noon.
Yes, hi. I just wanted to share, thanks for this presentation. So many things we need to look at too in Indiana, but I wanted to circle back to the DMV. I had my experience moving to Indiana and I registered, just like they said, when I was getting my driver's license, and I never was registered to vote. So I had to follow up. And if I didn't follow up, I would have showed up at the polls not registered. So it's not a fail safe. It's not a guarantee. I know I did it. I walked away with the paperwork, but if I didn't check it out, I would not have been registered. So I don't want people to think that DMV is a safe way to do it right now. For some reason, it's not collecting the two systems and talking together.
Yeah, I would love to know what the problem was there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
It
ideally,
might be a state issue too. It might be a state issue.
yeah. Okay, Nancy Cobb wants to speak.
Yes. Good evening. Yes, Nancy Cobb would like to speak on that about the DMV. I worked the polls, and there were many that came in to vote, thought they were registered at the DMV, and they were not registered. So I agree with Mary, who said that she personally, but I wasn't personally, but I worked the polls, and I did have quite a few people to come in to vote, thinking they were registered, and said that they had registered at the DMV and they were not. So I
Okay,
don't think the DMV is good. But she followed up. These people did not know to follow up because they just took for granted that they were registered.
yeah,
Some were even first time voters.
yeah,
And they were very disappointed because they were at the age that they had, this would have been their first time voting and they were not able to vote.
Yes, I
Thank you.
remember when I voted not in this election, but a couple years prior, and I'd gone to the polling place and I had changed my address because I'd moved on my ID, but my registration was at another address and they wouldn't let me vote.
wow. We took provisional ballots in that case. We handled, I think, around 60 provisional ballots 10 days after the election. And I don't recall anyone being refused to vote because they didn't show up as registered. We always assumed there was a possibility of a registration error. So we took a provisional ballot, and the person who runs Election Central here in Monroe County did a search, and where we found information, we acted on that. And we always tried to err in favor of the voter and count it wherever we could. Same with signatures. Some signatures, people change over time. If they had a stroke or had an injury, it could completely change their signature. So we always tried to do the investigation necessary before any vote was counted or not counted. But it's good to know about the DMV. I want to look into this. I want the election board to address this as an issue, and I want them to find out what happened and make sure it doesn't happen again.
Thank you, Hal. We had Nancy Rutkowski wants to talk about her voting experience.
Hello. Hello, thank you. I think this might be simply a COVID event, really, more than anything. But I'm over 65 and I got an absentee ballot. And being concerned that it might not be counted, I decided to go ahead and vote in person. And when I read the rules, it seemed to indicate that you could bring your absentee ballot to the polling place. They would negate it or whatever, and then you could vote in person. So I did that. I stood in line for 45 minutes. I got up there and then I was told, no, you can't vote in person. You have to go out in the parking lot and fill out your absentee ballot and drop it in this box, which I did and was fine. But it was a little confusing, and especially if I'm really doubting, I'm really wanting to vote in person. And doubting what is going to happen with that absentee ballot. I then checked on it and it was all right. But just, it seemed like a glitch there of how it should happen.
Yeah, that caused some problems at several of the precinct sites. You can only do that on election day. If it's still early voting, then that has to be spoiled to allow you to vote. But that part of it doesn't run as smoothly as it should, no doubt.
And that's one of the things that we've heard more and more stories about. So we'll need to look at ways that we can help poll workers be trained how to deal with absentee ballots or how to deal with provisional ballots, the kinds of questions that they may not know the answers to because people were turned away or weren't able to vote or had to stand in line with an absentee ballot that they wanted to turn in, simply drop off. And by the time they got to the front of a line, instead of going around it, it was a few minutes after 12 or after 12. And so they were not allowed to turn the ballot in, nor to surrender it to actually vote. So even if we have ways to do this, we need to make sure that poll workers know so
Yes.
that people are not left without that option to vote.
Yeah, in Monroe County, we addressed this problem by having a separate door for people with absentee ballots.
That was-
And that made a world of difference. Nobody had to wait in line.
I see a hand, Barbara Hargrove. Barbara, do you want to speak?
Yes, somebody had a question about how they knew that the people were deceased. I think it's terrible that some people, you know, who are dying, they get their last vote in and they don't count it. But I counted ballots this year instead of working at the polls because of COVID. And they run the listings at 6 o'clock before 6 o'clock in the morning so that they know anybody who has died before 6 o'clock in the morning, the day of the actual election. And that's how they know that anyone who has died is not counted. Somebody had that question, so I just
Yeah.
wanted to answer it.
And their ballots are destroyed without ever being opened. So
Yes.
nobody knows how they voted.
Yes.
Thank-
Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
And there's been a suggestion that we get more high school government teachers in on this discussion, that we get them able to tell students not just what the law is and what the basic procedure is, but actual nuts and bolts about what the issues are in terms of voting. So it may be that we want to inspire any or all of you to take this film, this discussion, to groups that you know, to youth groups, to teachers that you know, and say, can we get you involved in this? This is an issue for our democracy, and our students need to be involved. There is, I think, one other, let me see, there was something else. Oh, I know what else I wanted to mention to you. Some of you may or may not know, and then I'm going to get to Christina Crone, who's got her hand up maybe. Okay. There is an Indiana Vote by Mail organization which is advocating that we learn from the states that have been using vote by mail and how they've streamlined it, how they actually tie their systems together so the DMV can't subvert registrations or simply be lax about getting them in place, and so that the IDs can be matched digitally without having to push for specific voter ID laws that become cumbersome for people. So it's worth, if you want to know more about Indiana Vote by Mail, they are part of our All In for Democracy Coalition, and they have a separate website, which, since I'm going to send you all a follow-up, I will add their link to my information. Is there anybody else who has a question or a comment that I have gone over? There's a good, fairly good discussion on, yes, let me pull this back. Fairly good discussion going on the chat. So I'm going to come back to question. What was the governor's reasoning for not allowing no excuse absentee for the general election? And how do we check to make sure our ballot was counted? Governor sort of tossed it over, the no excuse absentee for the general election, tossed it over to the Indiana Board of Elections, and they were at a standstill and finally said they could not act without the legislature saying something, and the Republican and Democrat leaders of the Senate and House did not come together to say anything to the election board. So it was left moot until it was no longer possible. How do we check to make sure our ballot was counted? Hal, can you answer that?
Yes, we keep two records. When a person votes in Monroe County, they print out a paper ballot and that goes into a scanner. So there's a scanner record of it and there's a paper ballot record that we can cross-reference with that. We compare the numbers by precinct, paper ballots and electronic votes. And if they don't agree, we find out what the difference is and why there is a difference. So we make sure those numbers balance continuously. And after all the voting is done, well, first of all, before the voting actually starts, we have a sample set of ballots we run through to verify that we get the exact count we're supposed to with all the variations that we have. Afterwards, we choose an audit county or an audit precinct, and we go through each ballot counted by hand and the electronic count to make sure that they match. We want to make sure every vote is counted, and we can tell a person if they call up, yes, your vote was, you're shown as having voted. Maybe we're a little excessive with this, but I think everyone really wanted to make sure this year, especially with so many voters, that we didn't make any mistakes.
I hope that was the process everywhere.
I hope so too.
Olisa, do you have anything that you want to add to our discussion?
I think that for me, one of the things that sparked it is we were doing a voter registration, and we have got to engage our young people and get them involved as at 18. Even before, like I took my kids to the polls when they were babies. Like from the time that I started voting, I've always taken them to the polls. So I think that for me, that is how we're going to win this, because I think our young people are more open to change and more open to the things that we're discussing in this meeting.
Yeah, 16 and 17-year-olds, with the permission of their parents and their principal, are allowed to work at polling places or early polling places. So that's a great way to give them early experience. They
get paid for it. They get paid for it.
Yes, they get paid for it too. Yeah, that's true. Thank you, Iris.
Okay, well, I want to thank all of you for being part of this, and I want to give you a heads up about the Indiana Citizens Redistricting Commission. The commission is the product of our All In for Democracy coalition, and particularly led by Julia Vaughn at Common Cause. And it's a repeat on a larger scale of what Julia and a couple of our league members did in 2011. So this time, the commission will be holding virtual public hearings in February and early March to gather public input about from all 9 congressional districts, about what citizens would like to see as the criteria used for redistricting in Indiana. And we would like to see all of you participate in these hearings. We would like to get the information out to as many people as possible. We will advertise the hearings through the league, through Facebook, and because you're all on my email list now, I will email all of you as well, so it will be out there. Their report will go to the legislature advocating that these criteria be used and that the process be transparent. Then the next component is a mapping process, and that will take place. There'll be some training probably in March, maybe into April, on the mapping software called DirectR, and it will be populated with the census data as soon as that's available, end of April. People will be able to map on their own computers at home or elsewhere if you want.
Great.
But if you're trained to do this and you want to submit maps, the best maps that meet these criteria will be evaluated, and the best one will be sent to the legislature to say, this is how it's done. This is what we would like to see. And we want this publicly available. We want everybody in the state to know that it is possible for fair maps. So we want to do a lot of publicity, and we hope this film series will help to publicize the public hearings and prompt people to become more involved. Now, I will send you the press release because it came out this afternoon. So the 9 people for this commission, 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats, and 3 people who are neither Republican nor Democrat. So the Republican members, I'm going to tell you this, but I'm going to send this to you anyway. Clara Glaspie of Indianapolis, longtime Republican activist, first Black woman to participate in the Richard G. Lugar Excellence for Women Leadership Series. Lee Morris of LaPorte. Mr. Morris is the former mayor of LaPorte and retired as the CEO of the community hospital there. Marilyn Moran Townsend, Fort Wayne. She's the CEO of CBC Communication and a co-founder of AVOW, Advancing Voices of Women, a group to support and empower women as civic leaders. So those are the 3 Republicans. Democrats, Missy Summers Kemp of Portage. She's active in a number of groups organized around racial justice and environmental issues in Northwest Indiana. Xavier Ramirez of Carmel. He's a student at IU who works with the Civic Leader Learning Center as a student advisory board member. And Ranjan Rohatgi of South Bend. He's assistant professor of mathematics and computer science at St. Mary's College, where he developed a class called Mathematics of Voting. So those are the Democrats. And then the 3 that are neither, Christopher Brandon Harris of Hammond. He's a project manager for commercial construction, general contractor, and participates in the Mitch Daniels Leadership Foundation. Sonia Learcamp of Nineveh. Ms. Learcamp is the former Hamilton County prosecuting attorney who serves on the board of the Brown County League of Women Voters. Charles Taylor of Muncie. He is a professor of political science at Ball State. He's moderated numerous political forums, is committed to civic education. So diversity, age, region, political affiliation. So we wanted to make sure, and I was privileged to be on the selection committee. So we had over about 300 applications, which I think is a good sign for Indiana. So it was difficult to make those choices, but we had a lot of good people, and this should be an exciting spring. I look forward to all of you participating in this, and I hope to see all of you back next Thursday for our next film in the series, which some of you may already have seen, on Civil War. So come ready for that one. Bring your questions, think about them in advance, and we'll see you there. Thank you.